Greetings everyone, my name is Jonathan Bailey. I am from the website Plagiarism Today, which can be found at plagiarismtoday.com, and today it's time for the 7 and 7, the world's shortest and most concise copyright news program. This is the show where I spend hours every week slaving over a hot fire of copyright news just so I can condense it down into a 7-minute segment for you. That way you get all your copyright news in the time it takes you to drink a coffee and eat a bagel, activities I advise while doing this. On that note, here are the rules. I have a timer. You see it here. When I start talking copyright newsy stuff, it begins counting down. Hopefully, I will be done with 7 stories by the time I finish 7 minutes of talk time. Now, bear in mind, this is a brief overview. It will not be that in-depth. It will not be full of politicking and opinioning and the usual stuff. It's going to be just the facts, the best I can keep them, maybe a few jokes, and that's going to be it, really. Like I said, if you want something further in-depth, I do a podcast irregularly with Evan Sherris, and I have a 3-count column on Plagiarism Today that covers far more ground. But on that note, everyone, we've got a lot of copyright news to get through this week, so I'm going to start that countdown right about now. Okay, our first story this week is a major report from the U.S. Copyright Office, which has decreed that the making available right is already covered in U.S. copyright law and no revision is needed. Now, this is a pretty interesting story with a lot of importance, but basically, when the United States signed the 2 WIPO treaties and enacted them in 1998 as part of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, it was supposed to set aside a right called making available. This right was going to be akin to the right to copy, the right to distribute, the publicly display and perform, those key copyright rights. The making available right is basically the right to put it somewhere where other people can access it, to make it available. Now, we do not have that right explicitly in our law, but the U.S. Copyright Office has ruled that it is implied and it is covered under all the other rights we do grant. Now, this is very important for file sharing purposes, because if you put a file onto a cyberlocker or put it out there on BitTorrent, it's much more difficult to prove that a file was downloaded and actually distributed than it was just simply made available. So with the making available right, file sharing becomes a much easier crime, or a much easier crime to prove. On that note, moving on to Google and Tidal, both of which were sued this week. 2 defendants, John Emanuel and music publisher Yesh Music, I'm not sure which that is, sued both of them back-to-back, Tidal first, then Google, over alleged failure to pay or comply with royalty requirements for mechanical royalties. Now, mechanical royalties are the royalties owed to songwriters when a song is pressed and sold in some way. And theoretically, at least, streaming music services that provide that on-demand streaming like Spotify, Tidal, etc. are required to pay them. Both Google and Tidal have said that they are up to date with their royalties, and this is all a bunch of poo-poo. But this follows a similar lawsuit against Spotify. Now, all these lawsuits are seeking class action status, hoping to bring other songwriters and other publishers into the fold. After that, we have an update to one of the more closely watched lawsuits going on. RealMassive, a startup in the real estate database industry, has settled its case with CoStar, the more established and entrenched competitor. Now, CoStar runs a very large database of real estate properties, including all the data you would expect, and in photos of many of the properties. Some of those photos somehow ended up in RealMassive's database during the early days of the company. CoStar sued for copyright infringement, and the battle has been going back and forth for about a year now. Well, the two have reached a settlement. RealMassive, even though they still believe they've done nothing wrong and that they did all that they could, has agreed to pay a $1 million, basically pay out $1 million to end this case, and they're also striking a deal with CoStar to prevent future infringements from taking place. CoStar, like I said, basically just said that this was cheaper than trying to litigate it, which is probably pretty accurate. Speaking of Google, as we talked about in the previous story, that was a terrible transition. Google and Oracle both got a little slap on the hand from a judge in their case. Now, you'll recall that Oracle sued Google for copyright infringement, alleging that Google had copied parts of the Java code as part of their Android operating system. Google said, hey, wait a minute, we just copied the APIs, those aren't copyrightable. The trial court agreed, appeals court overturned that ruling that APIs are copyrightable, and when the Supreme Court failed to intervene, that kicked it back to the lower court, and it now has to rule whether or not copying the APIs was a fair use. Anyways, that lower court, both sides were trying to distribute a questionnaire to the potential jurors. Now, the judges sort of said, no, you don't get away with that questionnaire stuff. It's too vague, it's too broad, and basically you're trying to set the jurors up to fail so you can have grounds for an appeal for whoever loses. So, one of those rare times in which both sides are being accused of preparing for their inevitable loss. Anyway, moving on. Oh, shoot. Added a story there. LMFAO case. Oh, God, that's when I heard me. LMFAO case. Rick Ross's hustling copyright is now under question. Now, Rick Ross, as you'll remember, sued the band LMFAO, claiming that LMFAO, for their song Party Rock Anthem, which uses the line "Every Day I'm Shuffling," was an infringement of his song Hustlin', which of course uses "Every Day I'm Hustlin'." Now, the court previously ruled that the "Every Day I'm Hustlin'" line does not qualify for copyrightability when it comes to t-shirts and merchandise, but the actual alleged infringement between the songs, that's potentially going to a trial. But the U.S. Copyright Office has dropped a bit of a bombshell here, saying that all 3 registrations for the song Hustlin' are invalid, or at least have serious errors. The first one listed the work as being unpublished, even though it had already been distributed, and the second two, the two after it, were duplicative, meaning they shouldn't have been filed or accepted anyways. Now, of course, that's kicked off a huge firestorm about what that means for this case, and the judge gets to sift through that mess at a later date. Entering our very brief international portion this week, Hong Kong government has dropped its controversial, as this headline reads, copyright legislation. This was proposed very recently, and it was an attempt by the government to modernize, it says, to modernize copyright law, saying that the current law is out of date and it allows too much piracy, especially on the internet. However, various groups represented various fears of First Amendment, not First Amendment, but free speech rights. They don't have the First Amendment in Hong Kong, Jonathan. Focus! But yes, various free speech issues. The result of that was the parties that don't have control, the smaller parties in their parliament, filibustered it and kept throwing out delaying tactics, preventing it from coming to a vote, and now the government has just basically given up the ghost and will likely try again this summer. And finally, just so I can get the Kanye West tag down below, I get to talk about the Kanye West Deadmau5 feud that took place on Twitter today. Basically, Kanye West previously was so frustrated by piracy of his Life of Pablo CD, which he released exclusively on Tidal, which is probably why people are pirating it. West got caught. He posted a screenshot showing some of his YouTube habits. Basically, he was trying to highlight a new artist he was listening to, but he left his background tabs, and in them showed what appeared to be him downloading the music editing software Serum from the Pirate Bay. Now, the two had a brief back and forth, and I'll just let you read the actual tweets. They're pretty beautiful stuff, but long story short, Deadmau5 attempted to launch a Kickstarter to help Kanye West pay for Serum properly. And Kanye, asked Deadmau5 if he did birthday parties. It's really, really, really bizarre. All in all, a fun time for everyone, except, Kanye and Deadmau5. Well, I think we did pretty good there. I have a couple seconds left. Thank you very much for joining me this week. It was a great, great time. Barely got through it this week. A lot of stumbles and stammers. Oh, the drama is so great. But that's half the fun of the show. Well, on that note, everyone, thank you very much for joining me. Until next time, my name is Jonathan Bailey, and I am breathlessly signing off.